Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. Audiobooks.com is the chief underwriter for Good Books Radio, which is produced by UTRGV Media Services for Rio Grande Valley Public Radio. And now, here's your host, Dr. W.F. Strong.
Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. I'm your host, Dr. W.F. Strong, and I want to thank our underwriter, Audiobooks.com, who underwrites the program each week and who offers you a free book when you sign up to become a member of Audiobooks.com. Our book this week is Maestra, a novel by L.S. Hilton, and it is getting all kinds of praise. Things such as an instant bestseller in the UK, one of the Wall Street Journal's 5 killer books of 2016, foreign rights sold in 35 territories, film rights bought by Sony TriStar Pictures. It is a publisher's marketplace buzz book for spring and summer. I think that this book will be a hot beach read this summer. I think you'll see it in everybody's hands out on the beaches, not only here, but perhaps especially in the south of France and Spain and on those famous beaches there. In any case, we're fortunate to have L.S. Hilton with us. And Lisa, welcome.
Hello, it's lovely to be with you.
Well, one of the things in the advance publications here, the advance publicity, is that one of the critics said that the film rights were in process of being purchased, but evidently they've already been purchased, right?
Yes, I'm not quite sure where that came from, no, because the film rights were bought actually last year. They were bought in 7 days. It was a pretty quick sale.
Wow.
They were bought by Amy Pascal of Pascal Pictures, so it's going to be her first independent acquisition, which is very exciting. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the script is already done. It's by Erin Cressida-Wilson, who wrote Secretary, and her new script, which is the adaptation of another British writer, Paula Hawkins' The Girl on the Train with Emily Blunt, which I think is going to be a huge movie. That's just about to come out. So I don't think that Maestra could be in better hands.
Well, I think it certainly when you read it, it just seems like a film.
Oh, thank you very much. I didn't quite mean to do that, but I'm very glad that I did.
Well, I think that's a great compliment. Really, I think of some books I've read in the past where I felt I was reading a movie script. I mean, I saw it in my mind like a movie with no problem. Stephen King's The Shining was one of those that in fact, I even had Jack Nicholson in the role, you know. So you have this fantastic heroine here, and I think it's hard. Some people describe her. I've seen, people write about Judith here, and they describe her as, they relate to Gone Girl, or they relate it to 50 Shades of Grey and that sort of thing. And but I kind of see her as a kind of James Bond character who's female.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I don't think those comparisons are particularly accurate, frankly, and also I wouldn't like readers who enjoyed 50 Shades to be disappointed. I think this book should come with a warning. This is not a love story. I think she's kind of more like a female James Bond in that she's violent, she's ruthless, she's sexy, and she doesn't really have a kind of a major emotional life. Romance is not something that interests the heroine of Maestra at all. She's also, and very importantly, she's very intelligent. She's very intrepid. She's excited by risk, and she has a great deal of ingenuity.
Well, I think that one of the reasons I say she's like James Bond in the sense that if she wants something, she goes for it. She doesn't sit there and
like
worry
James
about
Bond,
it.
Like James Bond, she's also extremely well dressed.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. There's a whole fashion vocabulary here that's beyond me, but I was certainly aware that she is well dressed, and she is a person with an extraordinary background in art history, so she knows culture and class better than anybody. better than the billionaire she's hanging out with.
Yes, it was funny. I made them never look at your reviews on Amazon. It's a mistake. But when the book came out in the States, I had a quick look, and one person said, well, the problem with Lisa Hilton is that she really doesn't understand about class. She clearly knows nothing about people with money because, people with real money don't know. They're not flashy. They're not vulgar. I thought, did we read the same book? Because the whole point about it is that Judith finds herself in a world which is very much about new money, sort of brash, vulgar people who don't really have very much education in culture or art, and they don't really know how to spend their money. So I thought, did that reader miss something? It's set in this kind of Eurotrash, rootless world of the tribe of the international super rich who float their way down the Mediterranean every summer.
Well, where I was really caught up, so to speak, the moment that just really pulled me into the book more was when they had, I don't want to reveal too much, but I guess it won't hurt, when she had the unexpected death, and then she had to cope with that.
The unfortunate accident, yes.
And she kept her wits about her and moved on brilliantly.
Well, I'm glad that you felt that was a realistic moment in the book, because, in a sense, the book is sort of punctuated by turning points, and that's the sort of third major turning point in the story. And at that point, yes, one could have imagined that she could have, just picked up her expensive new handbag and gone home. And she doesn't. She uses her brain, but also her nerve. And I think it's something that tells you a lot about her as a character, because she does have sociopathic tendencies, and something I learned about sociopaths during my research for the book is that situations which frighten most people, risk, they actually experience as pleasurable.
Yes.
And she is frightened, she is alarmed, but at the same time she thinks, I can do this, I can get away with it. And that's what sort of excites her, and that's really what sets her off on her journey.
Well, there's a line came to me from Kipling as I was reading that scene, is if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you.
Yes.
And so her friend was losing it, but she kept her friend together. She whipped her into shape and managed her well and sent her home.
Bundled her neatly off, exactly, and then made off with the spoils.
Yes. So in some ways, she is not your average heroine, because she's got flaws.
She's not least the fact that she's a murderer. She's in some ways she's an anti-heroine.
That's what I'm thinking.
It was something that interested me when I was writing the book. Could I write a character who, in many ways, is very bad, but who will actually engage the reader's sympathy to the extent that they'll want to keep turning the pages, they'll want to find out what happens to her. I think the fact that she's quite funny. She doesn't take herself too seriously. It's not a book that takes itself too seriously. I loved what you said at the beginning about the beach, because I think of this very much as being a man's book as well as a woman's book, and when I was writing it, I really wanted it to have that feeling of a great holiday read, the kind of book that gives you sunburn because you're sitting there on your towel and you think, I'll just read one more page before I go in, and then 10 pages later you're all red. I would love that. I want it to be, an escapist book, a thrilling book, an exciting book.
Well, it's the kind of book, I think, that, you'll have a great summer read, and then you'll sit there.
I hope so.
You'll sit there with your friends debating on who should play the role.
Yes. I obviously won't have a say in the casting of the movie, but I think it will be quite exciting to have Judith played by a complete unknown, so that people can really see the character and not a star in the role. And then her lovers or victims. I think it would be quite fun if big male Hollywood stars were to play them, because one thing that Brad Pitt and George Clooney never get to do is die.
That's good. I think you're right. Yeah, the girl with the dragon tattoo, I forget who played that role, but she wasn't
Rooney Mara, wasn't it?
She wasn't unknown, but my God, she transformed herself where I didn't recognize her.
She really embodied the character, didn't she? Exactly.
So maybe at least someone like that, maybe someone who's known but transformed so much that you don't really quite recognize them. But anyway, I don't know. I haven't given thought to who I would see in that role. But you sound like I would think she would sound like. So maybe you can do the soundtrack.
I could do I could dub it maybe,
yes.
But unfortunately I'm far too old to even consider it.
Well, if they would create a kind of narration to go with it, a narrator, so you could do that part then.
Goodness, no, I don't think I could. I'm not an actress, but I do hope that maybe I'll get to be an extra. I'd like to be an extra maybe in one of the party scenes in the art world.
That's kind of become a virtual requirement now, I think, for the authors to kind of show up in some bit part, so it becomes a trivia question.
Definitely.
Where were they?
I promised my dad he could be a gondolier in one of the Venetian scenes.
Yes, I was talking a few years ago to Philip Meyer, who wrote The Sun, which...
such a fantastic novel. I loved that book so much. It was so interesting to learn about the history of Texas in that way. Absolutely gripping from beginning to end. And all the stuff about the Comanche, I thought it was just brilliantly written. I mean, again, the kind of book that totally takes you into a different world that you didn't even know existed, which I think is what really good storytelling is about. But sorry, my enthusiasm, I interrupted you. Go on.
I'm just glad you read it. I didn't even think you would have heard of it, perhaps, because it's such a Texas-oriented book. But you might say that that book did for you what your book did for me in relation to Europe, because I'm not very knowledgeable about that culture that you're writing about. Another book, by the way, well, let me back up just a minute. When I was talking to Philip Meyer, and at the time I was talking to him, he was in Los Angeles negotiating the film deal.
I see, how exciting.
And I told him that, I said, I just want to play a minor role, just to be a Texas Ranger, and you can kill me off quickly as long as I have an excellent death. That's all I'm after,
And good boots, really good boots.
Yeah, really good boots. And it reminded me of someone who once said that the best film death that you could have is to be killed by Clint Eastwood and have it narrated by Morgan Freeman. That would do me. I'd take that. Yeah, I'd take that. Well, okay. Now back to your book.
Yes.
Now I always have to ask, if you write about a really enigmatic character like this, what part of you is in that character?
Well, I think the short answer would be that there are a couple, but very few autobiographical elements. I gave her my own birthplace, which is Liverpool in the north of England, and obviously the interest in art is something that I have in common with her. And I would also say the interest in clothes, particularly shoes. I have a great weakness for shoes. That's the short answer. But I think... it's a cliche to say that all novels have something of their authors in them, but I think that inevitably one has, experiences in life, memories which are stowed away, which one is not necessarily even conscious of, but which do come out in the writing, and sometimes they can be very tiny, a particular smell, or a sound, something you've seen and remembered. So I think there are probably... Interesting, when my mother read the book, she reminded me of a couple of things which I thought I'd completely forgotten about, which is, do you remember doing that, or do you remember going to that place? And I thought, yes, maybe that's why it's in there. But I think consciously the autobiographical elements are quite limited.
Well, of course, your background, you have quite an impressive background in art history.
Oh, I don't know about impressive. I've worked as an historian for much of my career, Maestra, although it feels very much like a first book. It's in fact my 9th book. I've written 5 historical biographies and 3 historical novels previously, and I've also worked extensively as a journalist, as a critic and a broadcaster. So in some ways this feels like a change of direction, but when I was asked, how I came to write about, all the sex and all the violence, my honest answer would be that if you spent any time writing the history of the European Renaissance, you would know that fiction has absolutely nothing on fact. There's very little that I could make up which is anything worse than what the Borgias got up to in terms of sex and violence. So perhaps it wasn't such a dramatic transition as all that.
Well, I tell you, if I tried to write some of the scenes that you wrote, there, the sex scenes, it would just be comical. It wouldn't come off being real.
I think sex is quite hard to write because I think one person's erotic is, as you say, very quickly another person's comic. So I think they're sort of technically quite interesting.
Well, I think that's where you're getting, of course, the comparisons to 50 Shades of Grey, but I think that's kind of a red herring in this case because you have some wonderful sex scenes, but the book isn't about sex.
Well, the book's not about sex. I mean, 50 Shades is a book about a relationship between a couple. That's the focus of the narrative. This is not about love. It's not about romance. It's not even really about sex.
Right.
It's a thriller. It's a book which is very much for men as well as for women. I mean, if I had to write a sales pitch for my own book, I'd say that it was, a fast-paced, page-turning thriller. It's glamorous. It's exotic and erotic. It's got murder. It's got boats. It's got guns. It's got the mafia. And
there's your ad right there. You've got it.
It's got some really good jokes. All of that seems to me to be quite sort of gender neutral and certainly quite a long way removed from the romance, which is 50 Shades of Grey.
Well, in fact, you have a woman who largely is not.
She's not
interested in a relationship, and you have the man, the billionaire who doesn't want.
He's not interested.
He's asexual.
In either, no. In fact, a Spanish journalist asked me when I was over in Madrid when the book launched there a couple of weeks ago, will Judith find the one in book 2? And again, I looked at her and thought, what can I possibly say that's polite at this point? Because the idea of the one is not something that really enters Judith's consciousness. Sensible woman.
Why the title, Maestra, the teacher?
Maestra. Well, it comes from, as you observe in Italian, it's teacher. Three things primarily. Judith is very inspired by the 17th century painter Artemisia Gentileschi, who was the first woman to become a member of the Guild of Painters in Florence. Traditionally, the appellation would have been maestro, but because she's a woman, they had to change to maestra. So, firstly, that. Secondly, as you say, it can mean teacher in Italian. That's still what it's used for. In English, mistress, which is teacher, authority figure, but also lover. And finally, because we still use the word maestro when we talk about orchestra conductors. And so to me, the idea of someone who's capable of maintaining a series of complex and simultaneous narratives also struck a chord with me in terms of what Judith is able to do. So the words seem to encapsulate a great many of the themes of the book for me. And also, conveniently, as it's turned out, since it's now been sold in 38 countries, it's also a very international word. So it has the same title in every language, which is really exciting.
Do you, are you like most Europeans, you speak 3 languages or so?
I speak, French and Italian, fluently. I have some German. My German's not very good, but certainly. I mean, it's Italian and French. I can do my interviews for those countries in the native language, which is quite helpful. That's quite useful.
That's impressive. Very impressive.
Not really. Most people do.
Well, to Americans, it's impressive because we're all monolinguals here, I've got a fair moderate fluency in Spanish, but just kind of low level.
People in Texas speak very good Spanish, don't they?
Oh, there's a lot of about 50% of Texas is Hispanic now, so there's a lot of Spanish spoken in Texas. But most of your Anglo-Texans don't know much Spanish really. They know a few. They know the important words like cerveza and guacamole.
Yes, and please and thank you. Yeah.
Yes, know those. And this is going to be a series, right? You're going to have 2 more of these books, at least.
That's right. Maestra 2 comes out in spring 2017 with the 3rd one to follow.
Do you already have that written in your mind?
Well, when I was about halfway through this one, I knew that it was a longer story and would need at least another book. So the end is written. Volume 2 is pretty much done. I was meant to deliver Volume 3 as well this summer, but I think we might. I've been a bit busy recently with doing all the stuff for number 1, so we may have to postpone that slightly.
Well, tell them that you just need to spend time on a $100 million yacht in the Mediterranean, and then you get the feel.
That would be nice, wouldn't it? That would be necessary inspiration, yes.
Need some really sexy waiters taking care of you, and you'll get inspiration.
Oh, actually, one of the nice things they're doing in Norway, when she's on the boat, she has a rather racy encounter with Jan, the Norwegian sea captain, and the Norwegian publishers are doing a competition for Mr. Maestra, where readers can send in their version of the Norwegian Jan to win a prize.
That's great. Well, that's always good for a book if it seeps into the kind of sociological consciousness of any culture. So you can really take off. Some publications, some books really are just like music. I think of there's a guy here in the States who has an enormous following in South Africa, but he's not really well known in the States. You never know where, you're going to strike a responsive chord.
Exactly.
I know that you have another interview to get to, so I have to let you go.
We've been chatting. I haven't looked at the time. Golly, we have been chatting away, haven't we? Sorry about that.
No, it's
And we
great.
hadn't even got on to talking about my love for Mexican food and how much I love going to Texas because of the great... they have those tacos which have the kind of cactus in them, in the really spicy sauce. I'm obsessed with them.
Nopalitos.
And I get to come to Houston on this tour, so
Are you?
I'm really hoping that at least I'll be able to get one enormous Mexican dinner in.
Oh, of course you will. Yes. No, you will have no problem. There are fabulous Mexican restaurants all over Houston. And you're coming in the next couple of weeks to Houston?
I'm going to be in Houston next week. Will I have the Putnam people send you the details of that trip?
Sure,
Would that be useful for your broadcast?
Yes, that'd be great.
I'm sure I can take care of that for you. Thank you very much for having me. It's really been a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you very much.
I've enjoyed it very much, and best of luck with your tour.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
You have a great day. Bye-bye. We've been talking with L.S. Hilton, who is the author of Maestra. This is a book that's predicted to be a blockbuster this summer. It's also going to be made into a A-list film. So read it first so that you'll know the movie when it comes out, and you'll know the story, and you can go, as we all do, and see if they nailed the book. Now, in my personal opinion, this is a decent summer read, but if you are one who is disturbed by graphic sex and that sort of thing, this is a book with a great deal of adult content. So that's my advisory. If you have trouble with that sort of thing, then don't read this book. But if you liked 50 Shades of Grey, then you would probably like this. And but like I said in the interview, it is not a book that is really about sex. It is a mystery thriller. It isn't about love and romance and relationships, but it is about bouncing around the Mediterranean with billionaires and having a great time partying. And there's a little murder along the way, but you would expect that. So I recommend it with that caveat. The book again, Maestra, a novel by L.S. Hilton, and I wanted to share with you just a moment the things that have been said about the book by Glamour magazine. It says, Judith is no victim and proves herself a ballsier, more unflinching than a gangster would be. This is already being compared to The Girl on the Train and The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo in terms of addictability. Harper's Bazaar says it is a psychological thriller set on the French Riviera, rather like Patricia Highsmith crossed with Gone Girl. Unsurprisingly, there's a film deal in the works. And finally, we have this one from Heat of the United Kingdom. This book is brimming with scandal, intrigue, and mystery. This is a book that everyone is talking about, probably more in Europe because it's based there. I ran across an interesting list I'd like to share with you, the 100 greatest adventure books of all time. Now, I'm not going to share, obviously, the whole 100, but I personally have gotten a lot of wonderful books out of this, and so as summer is approaching, I thought I would share with you the top 10 of this list. National Geographic put it together, recommends these books as the best adventure books ever written by the adventurers themselves. So let's begin here. The number 1 on the list is The Worst Journey in the World, and this is by Apsley Cherry Gerard. It says, as War and Peace is to novels, so is The Worst Journey in the World to the literature of polar travel. This is the one to beat. It is essentially the story of the failed adventure or failed expedition of Robert Falcon Scott, where, he died coming back from the South Pole. And the whole expedition was in some sense a failure because he was beat to the South Pole by Perry. And so here he comes back, and he dies about 11 miles away from reaching safety. So that was a shame, but it is a riveting good read. And National Geographic says his book earns its preeminent place on this list by captivating us on every level. It is vivid, it is moving, it is unforgettable. The next is Journals by Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, Lewis and Clark. And this is their journeys that they kept on their expedition out west. Most people know that story, so I will not elaborate. The third one is Wind, Sand, and Stars by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. He is the one who wrote, as you know, the Little Prince. But before he had written The Little Prince, he had also written a good number of fine stories about flying. He flew mail, actually, from the European continent to the African continent, and this is a set of stories about his many, many adventures flying, and the beauty of flying over the Sahara Desert, etc. He said, "Tomorrow and the day after, I should learn that nothing was really unbearable." He is calm about it, he is thoughtful, he is disinterested, yet at the same time intense. He is riveting. He takes us to places between impossible hope and endless despair that we did not know existed. Exploration of the Colorado River by John Wesley Powell, is the fourth one on the list. The fifth one is Arabian Sands by Wilfred Thesiger. The southern Arabian desert, 250,000 square miles of sand, is now a place of oil wells and Land Rovers. But before the 50s, it was still known as the Empty Quarter, a place that you entered only on camel and only as an Arab. And so here this Englishman went into this land and traveled it at will and safely. Great expedition. Annapurna by Maurice Herzog is number 6. And no one had ever climbed an 8,000 meter peak when Herzog led a team of the best climbers in France to Annapurna in 1950. So this is that story. Number 7 is Desert Solitaire by Edward Abbey. Having lived out in Arizona myself for some time, I love this book. Nothing better than reading this book and actually traveling in the vicinity that Edward Abbey worked when he wrote it. He was a park ranger out there and wrote about the beauty of the desert. And then we have West with the Night by Beryl Markham. I like that Ernest Hemingway called this a bloody, wonderful book. It is about Africa and the early flying to see that continent. It was the best way to do so, to see the wildlife. And, of course, hunters liked people like Beryl Markham, who could go out and spot the wild game, and she could help them work their way there to find the herds. The next one is Into Thin Air, which many of you know. It was written in 1997, and it... was it fate that put Krakauer at once a crack climber and a seasoned journalist and a man with a sensitive conscience at the world's highest mountain during that notorious 1996 season? Well, whatever it was, 12 people died, but he left behind, this is the story of that failed expedition. And finally we have, going way back in time, Travels by Marco Polo. Marco Polo dictated these tales to a scribe, a writer of romances, and while the two men shared a cell in a Genovese prison, just how much one added to the text nobody knows, but it's still a very good read about early travels. So there you go. There's a top 10 reading list for you for summer. So I'm signing off, Dr. W.F. Strong for Good Books Radio. Here's hoping that all your books are good reads.